This could be a major offseason of change for the Seahawks at the receiver position. Where can they turn come draft time to try to resupplement their receiving core? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, whether you're listening from Ridgefield, Washington, or Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're now 2 weeks away from the start of free agency. Time flies, particularly once the NFL Combine gets here on the calendar. The Combine now is come and gone. We're going to be looking at the big winners from the last 2 days of testing at the receiver, running back, and offensive line groups. Plus, we're going to dive into potential replacements for Tyler Lockett and or DK Metcalf at the receiver position, where the Seahawks could turn come draft time in late April. This episode's brought your way by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. There's been plenty of speculation and rumors swirling when it comes to the Seahawks receiving core, and honestly, none of it should come as a surprise, particularly Tyler Lockett. We've been talking about that $30+ million cap hit since before the 2024 season even came to an end. DK Metcalf, it has felt like the last couple of years, there's been some speculation about his future, but this year in particular, teams are calling. They're trying to see if there's any way they can get their hands on the talented receiver. So it feels like at least one of those guys is not going to be in a Seahawks uniform this upcoming season, which makes receiver, as you and I've talked about a lot, Rob, maybe one of the biggest needs on Seattle's roster away from the offensive line. And this is not as deep of a receiving class as we've seen the last 4 or 5 years. So trying to fall somebody to lean on in the first round with pick 18 or even the middle of the second round, it might be kind of tricky to go out and find that guy that's going to be able to step in and immediately fill that production left behind by Lockett or Metcalf if either one of those players is not here next season.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Corbin. I think that, this is a wide receiver class that is lacking in the elite, the top end kind of guys. There were 7 wide receivers that went in the first round a year ago. And, one of the very last was Brian Thomas Jr., of course, with the Jacksonville Jaguars, was arguably the best of the bunch for all of the hype that there was about guys like a Malik Neighbors or a Marvin Harrison Jr. I would argue that Brian Thomas and all the wide receivers that went ahead of him last year in the first round would all go before any of the top wide receivers will go this year. However, I do think that there are 3 wide receivers that you justifiably could take at number 18 overall. We talked about how fast the NFL calendar is moving along. Well, it's not moving. The 4.29 seconds that Matthew Golden ran from Texas for to be the fastest guy at the Combine this year. So I think that you have to kind of start the conversation off with him as somebody who is very much just destroying any of the labels that some have, myself included, frankly, as far as the Texas offense being one of the biggest reasons why he was so successful. No, it's because the guy is an absolutely dynamic athlete. Luther Burden III has been a player that I have, kind of mentioned many, many times. I think that he would be an ideal fit for the Seahawks just because of his ability to bounce off of contact. He's almost built like a wide receiver. And then, of course, Steilacoom, Washington's own, Emeka Egbuka. I think that he would make some sense as well, although I personally like him best in the slot, and that's a position that I think that JSN is going to continue to command, regardless of whether Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf are back for the Seahawks. But to me, those are the guys that, if you want to be having that conversation, number 18 overall, those are the wide receivers that Seahawks fans should be excited about. I do think that all 3 of these players not only are dynamic athletes, but they are also terrific fits in Klint Kubiak's offense.
Yeah, you look at the big play capabilities in the event if DK Metcalf was to be traded somewhere, and it's looking less and less likely that that's going to happen. But listen, these conversations have happened behind closed doors. So you never know this time of year with NFL teams. But nonetheless, if you were without him or Tyler Lockett, the big playability downfield. You got to find somebody that can supplement and replace that production. Matthew Golden, of those three, is the most prolific downfield guy. And obviously the speed shows itself, 4.29, 40-yard dash. And there were some lost plays this year where Quinn Ewers did not get the football to him when he had burned corners. And so his numbers could have been significantly better than what they were if he had better quarterback play. It was inconsistent in those downfield throws. But Golden is clearly the deep ball threat of this group. And then Burden, we just saw Deebo Samuel get traded to Washington. I don't know if he's a carbon copy of Deebo Samuel, maybe not quite as stocky, but he's a guy that does bring a lot of tackles, can create after the catch, make guys miss, and there's still some vertical capabilities there too. This is a guy that can do a number of different things at the receiver position. In fact, I could see him being the first receiver off the board in this draft. He might not be there when the Seahawks pick at number 18 overall. And the last player you mentioned, Egbuka, I'm a big fan, but I do think that there is some repetition in the offense. There would be some redundancy having him and JSN both together. JSN can do a lot of good stuff from the outside. Egbuka has done it before too, but I just feel like you would have two of the same player in a lot of regards. And not that you can't be successful with that, but if you don't have those downfield threats, it makes it tougher for those players that really attack the middle of the field and the intermediate level. I think you still got to have that guy that can really chase corners and safeties downfield to try to open things up. So I don't know if he would be the best fit there. If Metcalf is still on board, that I think you could make an argument Egbuka and Smith and Jigba can coexist together. If you don't have Metcalf or Lockett there, I'm just wondering about the redundancy there skill set wise. When you go to the second round, there are a couple players that immediately stand out to me that I think would be really good values if you could get them at pick number 50, where the Seahawks pick in that second round. And these are the kind of guys that can come in and start for you right away that might not be quite as flashy. And I want to start at Iowa State with Jaden Higgins, a player who maybe has been a little off the radar for some people, but I don't know how you can miss this guy. He's a 6'4" target that wins downfield. He's outstanding at catching contested balls, both in the middle of the field and downfield. He's really good at winning those jump balls. He's got basketball player in him, and he's been extremely productive in Ames. I think that Higgins is a guy that's getting a little bit slept on here. I don't know if he sneaks into the first round, but with the lack of depth or lack of top-end talent in this class of receiver, it's possible that one of these guys could sneak up into the first round. He is certainly one I'm keeping an eye on. And I also think you've got to mention Jack Besh from TCU, who doesn't have the same athletic charts, eye-popping athletic numbers that some of the other players you mentioned have, but the dude is just plain productive. He's tough. He's a really good route runner, can win downfield, wins those contested catches, and has outstanding hands. At pick 50, he would be incredible value for the Seahawks.
Yeah, no question about it. Higgins, to me, he's a big receiver that actually plays big, and that has been one of the knocks that I've had about DK Metcalf at times is that, sometimes it feels like he is reliant on his speed and doesn't always judge the ball very well, doesn't get the ball at its highest point. Certainly as a blocker, you see the physicality, but not always when it's a jump ball situation. So that is one thing I think that Higgins does very, very well. I would be surprised to see Seattle use a second round pick, and that's about where I think you have to use. Second round, maybe early third if you were to trade back up or something to take a Higgins if DK Metcalf is still on the field. That said, I do think that Higgins, again, his ability to go up and take the ball away, to me, it reminds me a little bit of, the Higgins for T. Higgins for the Cincinnati Bengals, who, of course, just got franchised with his height. So to me, Jaden Higgins and T. Higgins are comparable. And speaking of comparisons, actually with Trey Harris, the former Ole Miss wide receiver, and of course DK Metcalf played at Ole Miss, to me, physically speaking, they look similar. Now, again, DK Metcalf is another 20-plus pounds and was actually even faster than Trey Harris was. But you see the ability, the long strides, the ability to pluck the ball. To me, he's a very exciting player that I think would fit in with the Seattle system because he struggled with durability over his career. That's one of the reasons why a guy who looks like a first-rounder on tape, but the durability red flags could push him into the second or third round. So that might be somebody else in play. And then you mentioned one of my absolute favorite wide receivers in Jack Besh. He is not quite the dynamic athlete as some of the other players that we just talked about. However, he is a pretty darn spectacular athlete. Won 5 different state titles in football and in basketball during his time growing up in the state of Louisiana, talent-rich state that is. He goes to the Senior Bowl. He's absolutely spectacular, MVP of that game. Goes to the Combine, has a strong performance there. It's not just the physical tools that he possesses that turn heads of the Combine. It's his story. It's how he came off during interviews. Talking with some scouts, Jack Besh was one of their favorite players that was interviewed this week at the Combine. So again, while this is not a wide receiver class, I think it's flush with talent as last year. There are still some very, very good players. So if Seattle does need to find a wide receiver in this class, I feel very confident that they can get one on either on first round or in day 2. You're going to be able to get a guy who should be a plug and play type of a fit in Kubiak's scheme.
Regardless of whether DK Metcalf is back or not, again, it looks like he is going to be back in uniform. And I've mentioned this all week since last Friday when I reported that there had been teams that had been kind of lurking around trying to figure out if they could trade for him. This has not been the case. The Seahawks have been actively shopping DK Metcalf. I mean, I think John Schneider had to be blown away by a deal, which is why the Green Bay Packers are a team that I was floating around that had maybe been digging a little deeper than some of the other teams. They have some of the young receivers, and they have the first-round pick that they may be willing to give up. But assuming DK Metcalf is back this next season, regardless of what happens on that front, with Tyler Lockett expected to be gone, you're going to need reinforcements at the receiver position. And there is some good value in the first and second rounds potentially for John Schneider to bring somebody in and replace Tyler Lockett. But that value may be in later rounds too. When we come back, we're going to be looking at some of the big winners in the running back and wide receiver workouts in Indianapolis this past weekend. Don't go away. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on it than the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off because of bad traffic or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking Luka Doncic to hit a clutch game-winning shot, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Monday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And for your second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcasts, and make it your second listen. The NFL Combine is officially in the books this weekend. Workouts wrapping up on Saturday. We had the skill players, receivers, running backs, running all over the place, putting on the show. And then the buffet bashers on Sunday, the offensive linemen. We'll get to linemen later in the show, but let's talk the blurs as it is, the athletes, the running backs and receivers, the guys that, and that comment will be funny later in the show, I promise, but these guys are the cream of the crop in terms of the athletes that you are going to see at the NFL Combine. And John Schneider last week on Tuesday, normally, Rob, he is not going to be telling you which position groups that he thinks have great depth, but he just could not help himself with this running back class, and it's completely understandable. I actually had a hard time picking winners from this group because there was like 7 of them, and I'm like, the numbers are just off the charts, and we know they're extremely productive. So looking at that workout on Saturday, really challenging to find players that really separated themselves from others because there is so much talent in this running back group.
Yeah, there really is. And so I'm just going to kind of start off the conversation with Donovan Edwards just because of the fact that, a couple of weeks ago, Corbin, you and I did kind of dueling mock drafts. And I thought that Donovan Edwards might be a back that, is undeniable talent, but might slip down the board because there is such incredible depth this year. And I think that his size of 5'11", 205 pounds, kind of in between the Zach Charbonnet style as far as a downhill kind of blue collar between the hedges type of a runner, but also has a size that's a little bit more like a Kenneth Walker III. And so he, I thought, was one of the real winners this year because other than a couple of breakaway runs that we saw him have, unfortunately for University of Washington fans and for, lots of other Big Ten opponents, Michigan Wolverines, Donovan Edwards has always been kind of a guy that's a little bit more straight line. And I think a lot of people were expecting times in the mid 4 or 5. So to come in 4.44 second, and not only the 4.44, but a 1.51 10-yard split. So that's showing that initial burst to be able to get to and through the line and be able to just run away with things. I think that surprised some people. 38.5-inch vertical jump. Is, again, just demonstrating the explosiveness that was obvious with the 40-yard dash time. And then, of course, the repetitions in the bench press. Look, bench press repetitions, to me, can be overblown. But at the same time, at the running back position, where usually it's about your feet, I think that demonstrates the willingness to put in the work in the weight room. And then, obviously, the size, the strength to be able to hold up in pass protection as well. So, to me, in a terrific running back class, Donovan Edwards still remains one of the backs that I think is a guy who's basically on the outside looking in when it comes to like a top 100 selection. But at the same time, I think he definitely moved the needle in his favor with his workout performance.
I've got to shift my focus to one of my favorite backs in this class that I don't think is getting talked about enough in terms of what I've seen on film. And now you put this workout in combination with the numbers. DJ Giddens, I just love the way that Kansas State prepares players for the NFL. There's what I call these blue-collar schools, the Boise States, the Iowas, the Iowa States. I think you can lump Kansas State in there. They don't get very many 4- and 5-star recruits, but they kick a lot of NFL products out of Manhattan. And DJ Giddens, I think, is maybe the perfect fit for Klint Kubiak's offense. If you've watched this kid play, he isn't the fastest guy, though he ran faster in the 40 than I expected. He's built kind of tall and lanky for a running back, 6'2", 215 pounds. You would think a guy like that's going to be bulldozing people. That's not really his game. He's more of a glider. I kind of see some Sean Alexander in his game from that perspective, that he's a bigger body guy that kind of glides through the defense. He's got a ton of wiggle, can make guys miss, and boy, does he have pristine ball carrier vision, which I think in a zone offense, particularly a wide zone offense, you got to have a guy that can see those creases developing, those cutbacks before they even happen. This kid can do it. And then going out and putting up the workout numbers he did, a 4.43 40-yard dash, nearly a 40-inch vertical at 6'2", 215, and then a 4.33 short shuttle. You got to see the entire package, the straight line speed, the explosiveness, the change of direction skills that you see when he's making guys miss in the middle of the field. I just think in a Shanahan-style offense, the DJ Giddens, this is the guy that you create in the lab to run the football in that system. And I was thinking he was going to run the 4.5s, to run in the low 4.4s. I think he made himself a strong candidate to maybe be the third or fourth running back to get picked when we get to the draft at the end of April.
Wow, that's bold words. Just because, again, this running back class is so gifted. I'm going to mention a back that was expected to run well, and he certainly did. And that's Bajal Tutin from Virginia Tech. I'm going to be talking about a couple of Hokies here for just a moment. Bajal Tutin, he was first in the 10-yard split at a 1.49 second 10-yard split, which was tied, I believe, for the fastest of anybody who ran, including Matthew Golden, the wide receiver from Texas. 4.32 in the 40-yard dash, that led all running backs. 40.5-inch vertical jump, that led all running backs. Then you watch him on tape, Corbin, and you see that type of explosiveness. So to me, he is somebody that we have to kind of mention here as far as the big winners of the running back position. But I wanted to actually mention another Virginia Tech Hokie, and that's Jalen Lane, the wide receiver and return guy. Corbin, he got 2 touchdowns this past season. And so I think that he is somebody that basically has been kind of forgotten about. But he was listed by Virginia Tech at 5'9", 180 pounds, comes in bigger, which doesn't happen at the combine very often, and faster than I think a lot of people were expecting. 5'10", 191 pounds. 31 3/4 inch arms. He's got long arms for a shorter wide receiver, 9 7/8 inch hands. So also has big hands. Only had 3 drops this past season. And he was absolutely terrific in the actual workout itself. 4.34 in the 40-yard dash, 1.50 split, 40-inch vertical, 11-foot broad, 6.75 seconds in the 3-cone, 4.12 in the short shuttle, and then 14 reps. I mean, I just love guys who do everything at the combine. Jalen Lane was one of those guys who absolutely knocked it out of the park with his performance.
Yeah, and he's one of those players that initially it scares you because you see all these numbers and you're like, but why didn't he produce the way that you'd think he would at the receiver position? But if you went back and watched Virginia Tech, when the ball was in his hands, he made things happen. I think it was mostly about the offense not being able to get the ball into his hands. The structure of the offense, the quarterback play was inconsistent. This is certainly a guy that boosted his stock heading towards the draft. Still squarely, to me, a day 3 guy, but there's a lot of fun things you can do with him. Let's stick with the name Jalen. There's like 90 receivers with the first name Jalen in this draft class, and one of them, you mentioned Jalen Lane. I'm going back to Iowa State with Jalen Noel, and this is another player that really eclipsed my expectations going into this combine workout. I looked at him as being a high 4.4s, low 4.5s runner. I did not expect him to post one of the best 3-cone drill times because to me, he is more of a smooth operating route runner than being elite quickness. He's a savvy route runner. His technique stands out more maybe than the athleticism. All he goes out and does is have a 41.5-inch vertical, run a 4.39 40-yard dash, and a 6.82 second 3-cone drill. Look, we talk about this a lot. I don't like to throw comps out very often. I may mention a trait that looks similar to a guy, but I watch this kid and I see another Doug Baldwin. That's the game that I see in this kid because, again, I don't necessarily see somebody that on tape is like, well, I see the athletic freak, although he tested like one in Indianapolis. I see a guy that really understands the game, how to attack coverages, is a really precise route runner, and wasn't the number 1 receiver at Iowa State, but this is certainly a guy that made some big plays for the Cyclones. And I think as a number 3 receiver or even number 2 down the line, that this guy could be a real dangerous target in Klint Kubiak's offense.
No, and not only Klint Kubiak's offense, but Jay Harbaugh's special teams is a return man. Whether it be Jalen Lane or Jalen Noel, both of them have return ability. Both of them with multiple touchdowns returned back as kick and punt returners. So again, very exciting in that regard. Finally, I think we would be remiss, Corbin, because this is a wide receiver class. It feels pretty tightly clumped there in the day 2, day 3 kind of area. I think Torrey Horton from Colorado State, just the fact that he was able to prove his health after struggling a little bit this past season, then winds up running in the 4.4s. For a guy who's 6'2", and catches the ball as cleanly as he does, has the change of direction that he has. He's a very good route runner. He's a really good football player that people are just sleeping on a little bit because he played, at Mountain West. But Torrey Horton, I was excited to see him prove his health and then run a 4.41. So not like he just barely snuck into the 4.4s, but a 4.41, 1.53 inch, 1.53 second 10-yard split, and then a 37.5-inch vertical jump. I would have liked to have seen him do the rest of the workout, but at the same time, I really thought that he did what he needed to do to alleviate any of the concerns that teams had about his durability.
Yeah, the health issues are well documented with Horton, but when he's been healthy, I'm thinking about 2 years ago when Colorado and Colorado State were playing in that epic game that went to overtime. Horton single-handedly kept Colorado State in that game. And when you watch him on tape, you don't see a guy that runs in the 4.4, low 4.4s. He has never been somebody that jumps out as a separator necessarily, but he can certainly win the jump balls. He's a really good route runner. So the fact that he came back healthy and ran that well, I think that bodes really well for his chances to get picked 4th round, maybe even sneak into 3rd round. Again, there's a blur here with a number of these players where they're very close together, and we don't know necessarily which ones are going to have those slight edges to get picked on day 2 or be early day 3 selections. When we come back, look, we got to talk about the real athletes. I mean, we talked running backs, we talked receivers. We got to get to the buffet bashers, the offensive linemen, and obviously that's a significant area of need pretty much annually for the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to look at the 5 big winners from the offensive line. That'll be coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Monday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to every one of the 12 that's tuning in. And thanks for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The NFL Combine saved the best for last this year. They mix up their order for positional groups, but I think they need to stick with this. The offensive linemen working out on Sunday to wrap up the festivities in Indianapolis. And I was really excited to watch Sunday's workouts because this is an offensive line class we've talked about. There's a lot of talent on the offensive line, particularly the tackle and the guard positions. And I actually feel a little bit better about this group coming out of this combine than what I did originally, at least from a Kubiak zone-centric scheme. There were a lot of guys that tested much better than I anticipated. And I think we've got to start this conversation with a couple of Georgia Bulldogs. And Rob, I'm going to give you the throne first here. Jared Wilson, who has blocked zone, he's blocked gap. He was a one-year starter at Georgia because Georgia's just had a lot of talent at the center position. But 4.84, 40-yard dash, this guy was absolutely flying. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, this is why I said that the running backs and the receivers are the blurs. That's not necessarily the case. Jared Wilson, the cameraman, couldn't get a good shot on him running the 40 because he was so fast for an offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, 6'3", 315 pounds, run a 4.84. I mean, the last time you had somebody run that fast, it was an offensive lineman, was, Lane Johnson way back in 2013. He ran the exact same, he had a 4.83 second 40-yard dash. So again, we're talking about a guy that wound up going to the NFL and has been a long time starter at the right tackle position for the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. So to me, one of the most fun things about Jared Wilson, as you mentioned, in fact, he's only a one-year starter, but obviously all those days in practice in Athens, Georgia, going up against that talented defensive front, then you can kind of throw the level of experience out the window a little bit because he is getting quality experience just practicing against them. I love the fact that it was the very last 40-yard dash attempt of anybody for the entire combine when he runs that fast. I mean, way to just kind of end the combine on your own note. So to me, that was kind of one of the fun things about him. I think that he would be a terrific fit in Klint Kubiak's offense. There's no question about it. He has the athletic ability. He has the toughness to be able to handle going up against elite competition. So I think that he would be a really intriguing fit. Let's talk about Tate Ratledge for a moment.
Let's talk about Tate Ratledge. This guy is one of my favorites. Sorry to steal the mic, but I mean, no. I've been looking forward to talking about this guy all day. And first off, I'm envious because this guy, I would sit here and say that it's a mullet, but I think we've got to call it a Ratledge now. Like, he's got his own hairstyle. And I absolutely love the way that this kid plays the game. When you turn on Georgia tape, he had an ankle injury that he had to have a tightrope surgery on this year. So his tape this season was not as good because he wasn't healthy. When he did come back, it took him a while to get his legs back underneath him. But 2 years ago, absolute mauler at the line of scrimmage, and he surprises you with his nimbleness. And so, I was really shocked that Wilson tested the way he did. Ratledge was an even bigger surprise for me, even though I've seen some flashes on film. He's been more known for his ability to bully people, but you look at what he did testing-wise, Rob, he ran a sub-5 second 40-yard dash. He had a 32-inch vertical, and this is what impressed me the most, a 7.38 second three-cone drill. There were a few running backs that were in that zip code for the three-cone drill. This guy has outstanding change of direction skills, which that's pretty darn important in a zone-centric offense. So the Ratledge himself, I am fired up about this guy as a prospect. If Seattle could get him on day 2, I think he'd be a fantastic fit. You could still run your gap schemes with this kid too.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I did not think initially that he would be a very good fit in the Seattle scheme for all the reasons that you just talked about. I mean, he was known as kind of a mauler at the point of attack. I did not see this type of athleticism on tape. However, the change of direction, again, the level of competition that he's faced every day in practice, I think just kind of speaks for itself. So he is another player that because of durability, that he might fall down the board just a little bit, but there is no doubt about that this is an area of concern for the Seahawks, and Tate Ratledge proved that he does have the agility to be able to handle this conversion to this scheme. So very excited about him. Now, let's talk about a couple of offensive tackles that some have argued might have to move inside to the guard positions, but I think that the way that they perform demonstrated they do have the athletic ability to remain outside. I'm going to start with Ariante Ursary, the 3-year starting left tackle for Minnesota Golden Gophers. This past season, Corbin, he was the Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year. And when you are 330 pounds and yet you are still running a 40-yard dash, it's 5.01 seconds. I know there's an awful lot of listeners and viewers out there. Thank you, as always, to all of you. But I can promise you that there are a lot of NFL teams out there that do take the 40-yard dash for blockers into account. They love to see guys who are that athletic. Ursary is that athletic, as is Josh Connerly, a player that, would start at the tackle position for the Oregon Ducks, and it was his improved play over the course of the season was one of the real underrated elements of why Oregon had the success that they had this past season. Those two tackles, I believe, are two of the absolute best in this class, along with the Armand Membos, the Josh Simmons, from Ohio State. That would be a great fit in this class for Klint Kubiak's system. And that's why, again, I think that this is a very good draft for the Seahawks to address their offensive line should John Schneider and the Seahawks feel like that's the way that they need to go.
It's interesting when you look at these two players. Ursary, to me, has solidified his standing as a tackle in the NFL. I think when you turn on the tape and then what he did athletically, he's got longer arms. There's a lot of reasons to think that he can stay out there. Josh Connerly is the one that is a fascinating case study for me because when you watch the tape, there's a lot to be excited about, but he's had some issues with keeping his arms engaged on guys that are flying off the edge. And it's not because he's not athletic. We got to see that in Indianapolis. It's because he's kind of a sawed-off lineman in terms of his arms. He doesn't have the length that Ursary has at the tackle position. And I just think when you also consider where his other weaknesses lie, I think sliding him inside, Connerly is a player that I could see being a really good guard in the right system. And that right system is one where his athleticism is going to be capitalized on. Who does that? Klint Kubiak. I think that Connerly is a player to keep a very close eye on that the Seahawks could draft and convert. And I'm not a huge fan of moving guys from tackle to guard. I'm not somebody that thinks that is, 2025, that's how you get offensive linemen. But I do think there are guys that come into the league that are better fits to do that with than others. And Connerly in this scheme, especially when you consider the fact that he had a 34.5-inch vertical jump. This guy is as explosive as you are going to find with offensive linemen. Just a hair over 5 seconds on the 40-yard dash. He had a good 10-yard split. I think when you look at the explosiveness coupled with that straight line speed, I think that this kid could be a really good guard in a Shanahan-style offense. So that is a name I would keep a very close eye on for the Seahawks in late day 2, early day 3.
Yeah, and another one, Gray Zabel, who may not be available in late day 2, early day 3, just because of the fact that his versatility, the athletic ability that he possesses. You just kind of gushed, and I agree with you about Josh Connerly's explosiveness, and he had 34.5-inch vertical jump. Well, Gray Zabel had 36.5-inch vertical jump. But again, this is the offensive lineman, not a shooting guard. I mean, it's insane when you have a guy of that size get up that high. It really is remarkable. It's not just the athletic traits about Gray Zabel that gets you excited, of course. It's the fact that he played every single offensive line position. Only a few times did he play center at North Dakota State, but he did do that, and also played both guard and both tackle positions with the Bison, as well as then going on to the Senior Bowl, where he was spectacular there as well. He's checking off every single box that there is. And maybe he doesn't have the mullet of a Tate Ratledge, but he's got his own little look.
He's got the mustache, man.
Exactly. The mustache there. That, again, I just love the versatility. I love the athletic ability. I think that he would be a nice fit in Kubiak's offense as well. So, again, there is an awful lot of talented linemen in this class, but some of them just are not fits in Kubiak's system. John Benton, I guess I should say, as the offensive line coach, his system. I do believe that all 5 of the offensive linemen that we mentioned today would be nice fits and could compete for starting minutes immediately for the Seahawks.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, Rob and I are going to be dishing out our post-combine mock drafts. We are the second of 3 dueling drafts. We'll have one more that'll be coming up the week before the draft, but we are going to be diving into that post-combine mock draft tomorrow. Make sure that you are listening in for the festivities and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.